Yes.
So you had mentioned that the informal social networks ensure and allow risk sharing. How, and from your data, can you see if those are tied to specific familial caste lines, or how are those social networks established? Like, for example, in Pakistan, the development work we do over there, those networks tend to be pretty closed, and it's hard to get into those networks. And so what happens to the people who are outside these networks?
So we measure them in a couple of ways. We took a census of every household in the village and got the names of all the individuals. And so in the monthly data, every time there is a financial transaction or any transaction, we get the identity of the partners involved, the buyer, the seller, the lender and borrower, and so on. So we can mechanically just trace out who is linked to whom by the transactions that we actually see in the data. And that's one, not the only one, but one definition of a network. And then we have consumption data and income data and so on that we can use to see if it's beneficial. So for example, being directly linked to an outside commercial bank, like the Bank for Agriculture, can be very helpful. People who are indirectly linked, who are not themselves customers, but are linked through third or fourth parties in this network, benefit just as much as those people who are directly connected. Now, we also have who's related to whom by blood and marriage. So we have the sort of proper definition of literally of a kinship network. That also plays a role. It seems to play more of a role as an implicit penalty that could be imposed when someone misbehaves, sort of like social collateral. It's true that in one of these villages, you could identify by language, whether it's more Khmer or Lao, even though they all self-identify as Thai. But we did not find very much along that line in terms of that particular stratification.
So in the film, you mentioned that some entrepreneurs turn out to be very profitable, and some should instead put their money in savings and help lend money to these profitable ventures. And you mentioned that it's not these profitability is not dependent on luck, but rather on personality or character traits. So I was wondering what character traits were predictive of successful entrepreneurship, and whether financial institutions might be able to observe them so that they would be able to allocate capital more efficiently.
Yes, well, so we gave examples in the film. Being creative about the business they're running, having that sort of automated machine outside the attracted additional customers. The dairy farmer there took advantage of a extension program through the dairy cooperative, and was doing all the right things about how to vaccinate the animals and keep them healthy. It's quite easy to make mistakes in dairy farming. So it's not as though they all know this stuff from the get-go, but they know enough to know what they don't know, and they take advantage. It's an insight that came with doing the research that we didn't really see coming. I guess we thought we would just use the existing variables that we had, which were more traditional things that we asked about, like education of each member and any extra education and so on. They do have some modest explanatory power, but the bulk of it is, as you were asking, the sort of personality traits. So we did implement a supplemental survey where we ask some of the traditional questions that sociologists ask, for example. do you stay up at night worrying about your business? Things of that nature, and they are partially predictive of successful traits. But I must say, in terms, not the Bank for Agriculture, which is quite good at outreach and has credit officers that get into villages. Unlike that, though, commercial banks know relatively little about what's going on in villages. The branches are in the towns, and they're not used to, to lending to people who live in villages, reasonably far away from the towns. So it's they could benefit. That it would be relatively easy for them to get a whole lot more information than they have. But the first step is just recognizing the heterogeneity that is out there, rather than stereotyping with the idea that farmers do risky things and loans in the hands of farmers are likely to lead to defaults for the commercial banks.
So I was watching the film. There are several questions that came into my mind, so I've got a couple of questions for you. First is about information sharing, because you talk about innovation, and some people are more creative than others. They have better ideas on how to do their businesses. And so I'm thinking about information sharing. So for instance, in more developed societies, you have things like patents so that people don't steal your good ideas. But it seems like some of these good ideas directly increase productivity. So why don't people just copy these good ideas and everybody can make more money? And so that's one thing about why is it some businesses are failing and they don't just simply copy good ideas. Second one is about whether these innovations, some of them are positive sum or zero sum. So in the case of positive sum, if everybody adopts these innovations, everybody benefits. But some of these business innovations, it seems like how to just capture a greater part of the market. So does it matter between innovations that result in net production, or it's just a zero-sum game anyway? The third one is about transitioning between from a rice cultivating business towards, I think, shrimp farming, for instance. So these households that make these transitions, do they have special characteristics? For instance, maybe they are geographically better to make the transition, or some characteristics regarding the household, for instance. So how do you explain why some households make these transitions? Thank you.
So I got most of that. I may need to get a clarification. There is a lot of imitation going on. So you don't have to rely on a government to bring in the idea. They do see their neighbors being successful. They hear stories about households in other villages. Indeed, for day laborers, they locate employment opportunities, by word of mouth and so on. Word spread, it's a very entrepreneurial society. Making money is a good thing, and they respect wealth, and so when you hear someone else, is making money, you're tempted to try it. So, literally, as you could see flying over the airplane, with the airplane over Chachungsao, you can see the landscape is just dotted with these shrimp ponds. Just the way high-yielding varieties spread in India, and it wasn't instantaneous. It goes from one successful farmer to another one. But they're not still, the point I said earlier, they're not all equally successful. So even controlling for people doing shrimp farming, some of those farmers make a whole lot more money than others. They just more diligent, they make better decisions, they monitor things more. And the film maybe casts too much of a sort of an optimistic picture that there are all these wonderfully profitable things to do. As it turns out, almost all the shrimp ponds went bad. Just like an aquarium where you can't control the water and it gets contaminated. Well, some disease spread throughout these shrimp ponds, and many people exited. Amazingly, there were some people who claimed they got control over the disease. Others switched to fish instead of shrimp and kept the ponds and so on. So the dynamic is one of it's not a fixed formula.